All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for tuning in. It's been a while, actually. I've had a guest on the channel with all the craziness surrounding free agency for the Bulls, but I've got a very special guest with me today. You likely know him as the host from Locked On Bulls podcast, and they also have a YouTube channel as well that they just recently launched. Same name, Locked On Bulls, and he does it with Big Dave, which is a great podcast, by the way. Definitely check it out. I'll leave it linked in the description. But it is Matt Peck. Matt, thanks for having you on the show, man.
Absolutely, man. Appreciate the invite. Glad to be here.
Sure. So, Matt, I've been following you for a while now on Twitter, on your podcast. And what I like about you and your podcast is that you're very vocal and outspoken of either the criticism or praise for the Bulls, and you do it in a fair approach. Now, because of that, we've got to talk about Bulls free agency. Obviously, some drastic changes to this roster, which was expected, in my view. I think most Bulls fans knew that this new front office, they were going to be making changes this offseason. But I'm curious to know if you expected the moves to go down in the way that they did. And was there anything that really, I guess, surprised you walking away from free agency?
Well, I guess maybe the one surprise was that after we got Lonzo, I think myself and a lot of Bulls fans thought, okay, that was the move that we heard that they were really going to go after. They made it happen. They made it happen in the opening minutes of free agency, so much so that we're now dealing with this tampering investigation. But that was such a departure from the norm of the old front office, where it was like, well, we're going to just kind of wait for the big dominoes to fall and we'll take the leftovers, I guess. And, that was very frustrating for this fan base, understandably so. But the biggest surprise to me was that after we got Lonzo and we thought, okay, that's it. And then we're like, oh, Caruso, that's a nice pickup on a pretty modest contract, some backcourt depth, some defense at the position of attack, which this team really was lacking. So, like, there's our big move and then, like, a nice secondary move. And I think most everybody thought, okay, that's it. No. AK and Eversley said, no, how about DeMar DeRozan? Let's get that guy also on board. So I thought that was the big surprise to see a front office say, we're making changes and we're making several changes and we're bringing in guys because we want to start competing now. There's none of this gradual stuff. They took a year, their first year on the job, to evaluate and then make decisions. Zack LaVine and Kobe White are all that's left of what they inherited. It's crazy. Yeah. And in the meantime, they've also added 2 all-star caliber talents in these various transactions. So definitely surprising when they went all in and said, not only Lonzo, not only Caruso, we're adding DeMar to the mix.
Yeah, and I was actually really surprised by the DeMar DeRozan signing in a good way. I like that they brought in DeRozan, but I was not expecting that. I heard a lot of rumors. A lot of people on my channel were saying, hey, we're going to be going after DeRozan. I was like, I just don't see this realistically happening. And I think it's because I've just grown accustomed to being a Bulls fan for so long that free agents just don't choose the Bulls. Right. So I was like, no, he's going to go to LA. He's going to go to a bigger team, a contending team of some kind. So the fact that, he was the one that actually, and the reports are saying he had multiple teams interested, but he chose to come to Chicago. And I think obviously that Mark Eversley connection helped. And I generally like to give player grades on all these free agency acquisitions that were made. We don't have to go through each player one by one, but I'm curious for you, if you had to grade the free agency as a whole, which technically it isn't over yet, and we'll talk about Lauri Markkanen in a bit. What would you give the front office as far as a grade for this offseason?
Well, if you're grading on a curve of what their predecessors did during free agency, A++. I like right. A++, because as you said, they actually got guys in Lonzo and DeMar specifically who are in their prime. Yeah, DeMar's on the wrong side of 30, but not by much. And he's coming off of one of the most statistically impressive seasons of his career. And Lonzo is a guy who is still, not even 25 years old, and they got him on a 4-year deal. And they're 2 players that wanted to come here, as you pointed out. Yeah. So if you're not grading on a curve and just look at, okay, what did they get and what did it cost him? Obviously, some Bulls fans thought that giving up a first rounder for DeMar was a little too much of an overpay. Maybe they thought 3 years, 85 was an overpay when asking, okay, well, who are the Bulls competing against? But you just said it. There were several teams interested in DeMar DeRozan's services. And some of the other contracts you saw going around over the past week makes me wonder, like, why is everybody so upset about DeMar's contract and think it's an overpay? His old buddy from Toronto, Kyle Lowry, who's older, got paid more And like everybody's like, "Oh, Pat Riley, what a genius getting Kyle Lowry to Miami." And it's like, look at this. He also gave Duncan Robinson $90 million, and you don't hear people saying
Jimmy
oh
Butler too. I mean, Jimmy Butler is getting a little bit later on in his career as well.
You know, even without the cynical grading on a curve, crack about their predecessors, I still think this is a solid B+ free agency for the Bulls front office. At least a B+, maybe an A-.
Yeah. And you go back to DeMar DeRozan and, people saying, oh, this was an overpay. I actually saw on ESPN, which I feel like I shouldn't even watch ESPN anymore with the analysts that they have on there, just talking nonsense. I don't even know if they watch the game of basketball sometimes, but they were saying that DeMar DeRozan, they listed him as one of the worst deals. I think it was Kevin Pelton that came out with that one. And I was like, did they not see Chris Paul's contract? I mean, granted, it was great what Chris Paul was able to do with the Suns and completely turning them around from being a lottery team to going to the finals. But 36 years old, 4 years, $120 million. I mean, you're talking about this guy going to be under contract until he's 40,
right?
For guard. Anyway, so I agree with you. I don't get I get it. Sure, it might be a bit of an overpay, but this is sometimes the things that you have to do to make your franchise relevant and to want to win now. That's just my point of view.
And for Bulls fans that complained for years about a front office that did nothing and couldn't get guys to come, now you're turning around and complaining that we had to pay too much in salary and picks to get a player like Lonzo, to get a player like DeMar. You can't have it both ways.
Exactly.
We're a team that actually is getting big names to come play here because the new front office wants to be competitive and wants to be competitive now. The old front office that was all about hoarding picks and developing through the draft, where are we with Lauri? Where's Wendell? He's gone. Like, it's not like these draft picks are like the gold that people think they are. You know what's gold? DeMar DeRozan. You know what's gold? Lonzo Ball. That's gold.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this, though. Was there a particular signing that maybe you didn't like as much? Or I guess I should say, if you were ranking all of the recent acquisitions, let's say you liked all of them, who would be on the bottom, factoring in their contract, their fit, play style, everything?
As far as the Bulls or across the league?
For the Bulls, yeah. I just mean the Bulls.
I mean, I don't dislike any of them. What I was most concerned about was grossly overpaying Lonzo.
Yeah,
if that was the one way that they could get him, was the Pelicans let him go and the Bulls have to sign some ludicrous, offer sheet for Lonzo that the Pelicans don't want to match. Right. But if you're saying that all you needed to get Lonzo was, okay, Sato and Garrett Temple, a couple of decent veteran role players, but that's not really costing you anything. Garrett Temple was on a 1-year deal. Sato was on the 3rd year of a 3-year deal and a 2nd-round pick. Yeah, that's nothing. And then when we got the specific parameters of the Lonzo contract earlier today, year by year, it's less. Yeah. Like it was reported, 4 years, 85. And I had said when we were talking about the Bulls and the options in the backcourt leading into free agency, I don't really want to pay Lonzo over $20 million. I don't necessarily think he's worth that. I think it's a bit of an overpay. Now, the only year on that 4-year deal that is over $20 million is the last one.
Yeah.
And all
Which
of that
is now
other
player
stuff
option too.
that added up to 85 was just unlikely bonuses that he probably won't hit. So if there was one acquisition and contract I was worried about, it was Lonzo's. And we learned today that was actually not that bad. Maybe still a bit of an overpay, but could, like Zack LaVine's contract from, the Kings match, end up at the end of it being a very, very valuable team-friendly contract, depending on how Lonzo performs.
Yeah, and I saw that you, I think it was you commented on it, you retweeted the actual final structure of the deal for the 4 years. And I've been telling my channel that for a long time now. And I've been getting a lot of criticism because I've been saying, look, I like Lonzo Ball. I think he would fit very well on this roster. And I still do think that to this day. But I kept saying and maintaining, you can't pay the guy over $20 million. I just, because there is still that level of uncertainty. He's had a great last season. He's shown improvement, but he's not the hype that we had initially expected him coming into the league. And so do you want to potentially pay for that hype, hoping that there is still that upside potential? My hope is obviously that there is, but I think now looking at it, like you said, 18 million for the first year, I could live with that, all the way up to 21 million, I think on the last year of his deal. That's definitely doable compared to what you're seeing across the market and what his market value would be. But you didn't answer the question though. If you had to rank one as far as like the bottom, would it be Lonzo in that case?
No, I still think it wouldn't be Lonzo. I mean, if there's one deal I like the least, I guess it would just be Tony Bradley, because I was kind of hoping for a better addition to the depth of the front court. And we'll see if the Bulls still do add something to round that out as far as like the back end of this 15-man roster. We did hear from last year's second-round pick, Marko Simonovic, after their first Summer League game, that he will be one of those 15. So that's some front court depth, but it's not really the rim protection and like solid interior defense that you lost, not only with Thad Young, but also the departure of Daniel Tice. So like, look, Tony Bradley, he can give you some, 10, 12 minutes off the bench, but and it's not like they spent the farm to get him. Like, he was a cheap contract. I was just kind of hoping for maybe a half a tier above that as far as who we could get to bulk up the front court and the rim protection for this team.
Right. And so let's go back to Lonzo Ball for a second. Got to talk about the sign and trade situation and the fact the league is now investigating the deal and the possible tampering violations. Now, I've expressed my frustration on my channel, around this, and I know you've talked about it as well, and we can get into that. But what do you think is ultimately going to happen from this investigation? And if the Bulls are in fact found guilty, because they might not be, what are going to be the penalties imposed upon them?
Well, I'm legitimately worried right now about potentially a penalty of a first-round draft pick being taken away. That's my big concern. I don't care if Adam Silver slaps the Reindorfs with a fine. Not my money. Like, cut that check. We know you can afford it. Cut that check. If that's part of the cost of tampering, cut that check. Not my problem. I don't think we're going to see suspensions for executives. I think that is a severe punishment that the league won't hand down. Because look, I don't know why they're deciding to make an example of the Bulls and also maybe the Heat with the Lauri situation when every team tampers, and we know that. Every single team. We were talking earlier about what's going on with, Daniel Tyson, the sign and trade off to Houston. Mark Stein was talking about that in his latest work. He heard wind of a Daniel Tice sign and trade to the Rockets on draft night.
Yep.
4 days before free agency started. So if that's what you're talking about with the Bulls, is like, well, yeah, everybody tampers, but it's just free agents making, agreed upon contract length and dollar amount. And so, yeah, if you do that within the first minutes, it doesn't look so fishy. It's when you add in the other complicated elements of a sign and trade and say, here is this deal, we were reporting it at 5:01 p.m. Central Time. The league's going to look and say, come on, guys. But look, the Bulls, clearly, with the example of that Daniel Tice to Houston thing, not the only team that was doing that. So it's frustrating, and I don't know why they're zeroing in on the Bulls, but that's what I'm worried about, is a first-round pick. And look, if there's one person you trust when it comes to NBA rules, NBA cap, all that kind of stuff, it's Bobby Marks. And he has been doing these Instagram videos talking about this tampering investigation, and he said that he believed that the league was going to come down hard on the Bulls and the Heat because they were just like not even pretending to hide the fact that they were tampering with these. And that it could be more severe than the example of the Bucks getting a second-round pick taken away from them for the Bogdanovich thing that didn't even work out. That's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about the Bulls losing a first-round draft pick when we're talking about we've conveyed one of two to Orlando for Vooch. We got to send another one to San Antonio for DeMar. And I'm okay with using that draft capital to get all-star caliber players to play here now. Losing a first-round pick as a penalty for tampering on top of that would really be a gut punch.
Well, and that's why, there's been reports now that Lauri Markkanen and what they're seeking in a sign and trade is a first round pick. And I'm almost wondering if they're doing that for the purposes of, well, we might get this penalty. Let's try to get this first round pick in order to pay for that, essentially. I agree with you. I think that was the most frustrating thing for me, is it's like I've been following basketball for a number of years now. And every year when free agency, that the opening period, which they've changed, used to be midnight, and now it's in the afternoon or evening. That very first minute, deals start coming in as far as who's signing with who, and every year it happens. So it's like, well, how, if they're not able to actually contact players and teams aren't able to like start negotiating contracts, how is it possible that they're already able to come to an agreement that quickly? And especially like you mentioned with sign and trade. So we all know that they do it. We know that the players talk. Why are the Bulls being singled out in this scenario? And they might just be being made an example out of, which sucks as Bulls fans. But that was the thing that bothered me the most. I will say, though, I do agree, and I mentioned this on my channel, is it's like, I don't get why they had to announce it right at 6:01. They couldn't have just waited a few hours, even the next day, to make it look a little less obvious. And with the front office that I deem to be very competent, very smart, I just thought that was kind of odd that they did that. But
which is why I think that it's not the Bulls who leaked that. I think it was Clutch Sports, Lonzo's agency, who was very excited to announce that deal. Sure. I mean, AK and Eversley have been playing everything very close.
Yeah.
Like we thought, Orlando's keeping Vooch, whatever. Like some Bulls fans are like, Vooch could be a good pickup. And everybody's like, yeah, it's not happening. Orlando's not trading. Boom. Out of nowhere. Yeah, Bulls are trading for Vooch. Similar thing with DeMar. Like there were a couple of whispers, but not a whole. And then boom, here's DeMar. They are very tight and they don't leak. There's evidence of them a year and a half on the job. They don't leak anything.
Yeah.
So when it was 6:01 Eastern time and that deal came through, my assumption was it's Clutch Sports with their client, Lonzo, who they're trying to boost up. As you said, a former second overall pick who's kind of had this weird, meandering start to his career, and they're really excited about him going to a big market like Chicago. I think they're the ones who leaked it, and it'll be unfortunate if the Bulls get penalized for that. But my buddy Big Dave's conspiracy theory is that the Pelicans' new front office advisor, Gar Foreman, is the one who leaked it to the media to punish the team that fired him and a little bit of vengeance, because he assumed, the Pelicans won't get penalized for this, but the Bulls sure will.
Right. It's a good theory. I never even really I know that Gar works for the Pelicans now, but never really thought about that before. So let's move on from free agency a little bit and let's talk about this upcoming season. Very critical season for the Bulls. And I would say, that was probably the case before the Bulls made all these recent acquisitions, that this upcoming season was going to be a critical one for them. But even more so now after these moves have been made. What are your expectations of the Bulls this season?
Expectations have to be playoffs. And then beyond that, you talk about, can you maybe get home court in the first round? Can you fight your way into being a top 4 seed in the East? It won't be easy. I think a lot of teams in the East did well this offseason. And so if you're going to kind of break down the tiers, I think you got to start with obviously Brooklyn and Milwaukee, the defending champs in Brooklyn. I thought Brooklyn had a great offseason. Like Patty Mills, one of the greatest low-key signings of this free agency. He's going to bring them so much of what they need. So then you got Philly, and it depends on what are they going to do with Ben Simmons? Are they going to trade him before the season? What happens there? But you still have an MVP candidate in Embiid and nice complementary pieces. And then you got Boston. Are Tatum and Jaylen Brown going to be enough to come back and lead that team to a top 4 seed with the departure of Kemba Walker, who didn't work out? And then the Bulls are, after that 4, one of a handful of teams with Charlotte, Atlanta, Washington with their offseason dealings, the Indiana. What are they going to do? Are they going to bounce back? That are all just going to be in that jumbled mix of 4 through 10, basically, the last of the top 4, and then all the way down to the final spot in the play-in. And the Bulls could be anywhere in there. I think there's a big range of, if things go well, the Bulls could have home court in the first round. Yeah. If things go poorly, they're one of the teams 7 through 10 playing in the play-in tourney.
Really hope that doesn't happen. But I agree with you, because it's you look at the Knicks of last year, right? They somehow, they didn't do that well in the playoffs, but they were able to snag a 4 seed and they had home court advantage. No one was expecting that. And so there's really so much wiggle room between that 4 and 10 spot. Everyone's going to kind of be in a close battle there, I assume anyway, granted, barring any injuries to any teams for that matter. But yeah, I agree. And I think playoffs is a must. I even said that last year, that if they don't make the playoffs, that it's a disaster of a season. And I mean, there were certain circumstances. Obviously, there was COVID. You had Zack LaVine going into the protocol at the end of the season. The trade, although was great, it didn't help that they weren't able to practice together, that it was a compacted schedule. So all of that. But if they don't make the playoffs this year, that would be an absolute disaster. And I mean, not even just the play-in. Like if they somehow find themselves into the play-in, they got to make it in. They got to make it in, and they got to compete in an actual series. With the level of talent that they've been able to bring in, with the amount of money that they've been paying these guys, there's just no excuse for them to be missing the playoffs. So yeah, I mean, I hear a lot of fans also saying, well, we're title contenders now. No, I'm not going to go that far. Like, I mean, I would say like a max ceiling is conference finals, and that's generous. My hope is that
nobody thought Atlanta was going to the conference finals.
Very fair, very fair. And so, yeah, I mean, it's possible, right? I mean, my expectation is a second round. I really hope that the Bulls can at least win a playoff series, and that's definitely doable, like you said, if they finish with home court advantage. And a hard fought series. I want to see this team play hard. I just feel like we haven't seen that in a long time, since like the Tom Thibodeau days.
I miss competitive Bulls basketball, man. I really do. It's been brutal to do a Daily Bulls podcast, to do that Outsiders gig for a couple of years, when it was some of the darkest days. Yeah. I mean, not as dark as the 98 to 03 Jerry Krause years after the dynasty. Like, that was the darkest time, but this has been the second darkest. And you didn't give up picks for Vooch. You didn't give up a first rounder for DeMar, and bring in all these pieces to make Zack LaVine happy and finally give him some talent worth a damn to play with, to not make the playoffs and not compete now. They are clearly with these moves in win now mode. They want to get competitive. Like you said, Bulls fans were like, we're title contenders. Like, pump the brakes. How about let's make the playoffs?
Let's make the playoffs first.
This team hasn't seen the second round of the playoffs since 2015.
Yeah.
When Derrick Rose and that crew bowed out in 6 games to LeBron's Cavs. So it's been a minute. And let's start with, we added some talent. Let's prove that when it comes to the East, which is more challenging than I think it was even a couple of years ago, they can find themselves in the hunt for home court in the first round. I think that is a reasonable expectation.
I agree. Which, because I'm curious about this, which player do you think this season will be the most critical for them for their overall career? You have guys like Patrick Williams. You could even say Marko Simonovic. Then you also have Lonzo Ball, who has the opportunity for a fresh start in a big market and new environment. And then, of course, Zack LaVine looking to finally make the playoffs for the first time in his career. If you had to pick one player, who would you say this season is going to be the most crucial for them?
I think without a doubt, it's Zack LaVine.
Yeah.
He is the incumbent all-star on this team. Obviously coming back from a very positive experience, winning gold with Team USA in Tokyo. So proud of him. So happy for him for that experience. Can he bring some of that winning mentality and that experience playing with some of the other elite players in the NBA on his Team USA roster and apply it to a fresh season with some added talent? Because the thing that didn't get done this offseason, and we're excited about Lonzo and DeMar, is the other possible route they could have gone, which was renegotiating and extending Zack LaVine's current contract.
Right.
He's now entering the final year of his contract and will hit unrestricted free agency, a year from now. So that's scary, but there's so many factors here. Does his usage go down with the arrival of DeMar DeRozan? Hopefully DeRozan takes some of that offensive weight off of Zack LaVine's shoulders.
Absolutely.
Does he then have a, statistically speaking, less impressive season than last year, where he's 27-5-5 and clearly dragging this team every night? Because the other element to that is it somehow feasible that Zack LaVine makes All NBA next season? I would say he is not a likely candidate. Other players would have to have a bad season or an injury season or whatever. He's on the outside of that fringe, I think, for All NBA consideration next season. But if somehow he does do that, then you're talking about a massive, massive contract. And then, hey, look, AK and Eversley have proven that they are getting the Reinsdorfs to finally open their wallets a little bit. Billy Donovan didn't come cheap. Mark Eversley, after they hired AK, didn't come cheap. AK himself didn't come cheap. They stole JJ Polk away from the Pelicans. They paid him well. And that's just like, Billy Donovan, coaching staff executives. They spent a lot of money on those kind of people in the organization and then spent big on Lonzo and spent big on DeMar. If the Bulls have a solid season, if Zack LaVine has a strong season, if Zack LaVine makes a second consecutive all-star team, will the Reinsdorf say, this is one of the rare occasions where we are willing to go into the luxury tax, to keep Zack LaVine here and surround him with this expensive talent?
Yeah.
Bulls fans who have been fans of this team for as long as I have, as long as you have, know that the Reinsdorfs do not like that luxury tax, and they're only going to do it if they see championship contention.
Yeah, which is ironically, being in one of the biggest markets, they don't want to spend the money. You talked about Zach's efficiency. I mean, that's one of the things that when I heard about the sign trade for DeMar DeRozan, the first thing that popped in my mind is, I wonder how this is going to impact Zach's numbers, and whether or not that'll impact his future contract. Obviously, right? It's going to impact his future contract, but I think that it's going to be great. I think his numbers will go down, but not in a bad way. It's because he's actually finally going to have someone to be able to share the offensive load with. And I think we're also going to see more productivity from Vucevic after a full offseason, getting used to the team. And hopefully that ends up being the case with Patrick Williams as well. I mean, hopefully we'll see some increased offensive aggressiveness from him, which we saw a little bit in Summer League, and we'll talk about that in a sec. So I think his numbers will go down. I don't think that that'll impact his contract all that much. I still think the front office is going to be, they're going to have to give him the max. Whether he's worth that or not, I mean, that's a different story, but I think that that's going to be the fact of the matter, and they're going to have to operate over the tax. That's just right. What I'm thinking.
I can't imagine that they'd be willing to just say, well, Zach, thanks for some good years.
Yeah.
You were the face of our franchise while we were struggling to get back to relevancy. Now that we're relevant again, we're not going to pay you, so bye.
And the fact that they're building around him, right? You know what I mean?
I've heard a lot of people say that the reason they brought in DeMar is that he will be the replacement for Zach because they're not going to want to pay him, and they're essentially the same player. And like it was like, I heard it on the Bill Simmons podcast. I heard it on a bunch of different platforms, and I'm like, these people don't know what they're talking about and what they're looking at, because you didn't bring in DeRozan to replace Zack LaVine because you don't want to pay him. You brought in DeRozan to help Zack LaVine.
Yeah. And not only that, but DeRozan's 32 years old, and you give him a 3-year contract. I mean, I heard that, Bill Simmons and what he was talking about there as well. And I'm just like, these guys aren't, first of all, they're not the same player. I know that they're both very athletic and they have highlight reel dunks. Outside of that, their games are very different. They're not the best defenders, sure, but they obviously DeMar DeRozan is a much better mid-range player. Zach can space the floor a lot better. So I don't like the comparison that they are very similar, that they're the same type of player. I do think the fit might be a bit of a challenge, only initially, because I think it's possible Zach might struggle with the idea of playing with another ball dominant type player that scores a lot. But I think overall, Zach LaVine, if there's anything that we've really learned from him in his time with the Bulls, is that he wants to win, and he's going to do what he can to sacrifice himself and his numbers in order to be able to get that. So I don't see that being a problem for LaVine. I think he's happy that this has finally come and that he's going to have the help that he's going to need to actually start winning, which, by the way, thank you so much for calling out all those people that were showing that ridiculous stat of, oh, Zack LaVine has won 4 in a row in the Olympics. Did you know that that's the first time he's done that since he was in college at UCLA? Like, that's so circumstantial. Like, how are you just going to call that out? Like, oh, that means Zack LaVine doesn't know how to win. He's been in the league for 8 years and has never had a 4-game winning streak. Like, come on, give me a break. Like,
a lot of people took that to mean, oh, here's example 1,000,000 of Zack LaVine isn't a winning player. And you're like, no, that's not what we're saying here. It's a crazy circumstantial stat that has told you what? Since coming to the NBA, Zack LaVine has been on some doo-doo teams. And look, before Devin Booker got some help, everybody called Devin Booker not a winner.
Yep, same case,
His lotto pick center, DeAndre Ayton, takes a big step developing and advancing his game, and he gets some veteran backcourt help in Chris Paul, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, Devin Booker, what a winner. He's taking his team to the conference. It's like, hey, Zach LaVine has not had the proper help in Minnesota or now in Chicago. So, obviously I've always been an advocate for Zach. I root for him. He is a great guy, and I agree with you in that what he really wants to do is be here in Chicago and win. And if he can win without needing to hoist 15 threes and making a dozen of them, I don't think he's going to complain about that. If DeMar DeRozan can chip in, 18, 20, 22 points a game and give Zach a break because DeMar's just shooting free throws, I don't think Zach's going to complain about that.
No, not at all. Not at all. So let's talk about Summer League real quick, and I'll sort of wrap it up around there. But the Bulls had their first game yesterday. They have another one in a few hours, which, by the way, for those listening, depending on when you're hearing this, we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon, but a bad loss for the Bulls. But again, Summer League. And, I've said this on my channel. I don't put a lot of stock into Summer League because you had guys like Tony Snell and Doug McDermott, Denzel Valentine that balled out in Summer League. And, of course, that got me excited thinking that these are going to be game changers for the Bulls. And, of course, we all know what happened. But anyway, takeaways from that first game, who are you excited to see play for the rest of Summer League? What were your thoughts? And what are you, looking forward to for the rest of it?
Well, I mean, first of all, you can't sell short Denzel Valentine Summer League champion. I mean, he will have that
game-winning shot.
Have that and that game-winning shot on his resume forever. Yeah. And yeah, parentheses, bye Denzel. Won't miss you. As far as what I saw in the first Summer League game, it was a tale of two halves with Patrick Williams, who clearly, Damian Cotter, the Summer League coach, one of Billy's assistants, told him, you're running the offense out there in the starting five and for as long as you can. And we saw Patrick Williams do a lot of stuff that we didn't really see him get a chance to do his rookie year because he was playing as the fourth or even at times fifth option offensively in the Bulls starting unit. So we saw him running some pick and roll. That was pretty exciting. We saw him driving and dishing to shooters, and that was exciting. We also saw him turn the ball over 5 times because guess what? Patrick Williams not used to handling the ball that much. Right. So I thought it was a fine sample of good and bad. I loved when he just pulled up, crossed up his guy and just off the dribble drilled that three.
That rainbow three
from the wing. That was amazing.
Yeah.
But again, you look at what he's going to be asked to do in Summer League, where he is the best player, compared to, all right, you're in the starting lineup and you're offensive option number 5 behind the other 4 guys on the floor, and primarily what Patrick Williams in season 2 is going to be asked to do by Billy Donovan every night is what he was asked to do every night last season, which is guard the best player on your opponent. Yeah. Guard the best player. So look, I'm excited to see what P-Dub can do in year 2, but Bulls fans should temper their expectations. And obviously, as you said, take Summer League with a big, big grain of salt. But honestly, the thing I'm most excited about after watching his first Summer League game is his body. He looks somehow like leaner, more muscular, and taller. I think he grew an inch since May.
I tweeted that, so I was like, is it just me, or did Patrick Williams get like bigger? Or maybe it's like in Summer League, obviously the players, they're not all of them anyway are professional basketball players. Maybe they're just a little smaller, but he just looked big on the court. It's just, I don't know. That's what I loved seeing. But I mean, he was, a few of my subscribers, they were saying they were kind of disappointed in what they saw from Zack LaVine. Again, I kind of have to remind them it's Summer League, but also I'd like that he was taking more shots, even if it meant missing them. I think this is a good opportunity to do that kind of thing. This is Summer League. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't count for anything. These are the opportunities where you can start showing more aggression. You can start putting up more shots, and it's okay to learn from your mistakes because he's going to need to have that going into the regular season. The thing that concerned me, not really even a concern because he was just a rookie, but with Patrick Williams was that he passed up on a lot of shots that he could have easily taken. And of course, he was 19. He still is 19-year-old kid, didn't have a Summer League, didn't have a full training camp, came into the league, weird circumstances, getting drafted, and then played his first game nearly a month later. That's going to be a bit of a learning curve for him, coming into the league. So I get that he was a little bit hesitant, a little bit timid, and kind of deferring to other players, but I want to see him be more aggressive. And so I liked that he was doing that in this Summer League game, even if it meant that, he only shot 6 for 20. But
I
how about
hopefully also he gets some run with the second unit at times this season where he can maybe be more of an offensive focal point.
yeah,
In
absolutely.
addition to being a defense first player with that first unit.
Definitely. So, thoughts on Marko Simonovic or any other players from Summer League?
Yeah, I mean Marko, first taste other than game highlight clips on YouTube from his league overseas. I was pleasantly surprised by how well that dude runs the floor.
Yeah,
For whatever reason, that didn't necessarily translate when I was watching his highlight reels on YouTube, but seeing it in game action, and he talked about it after the game. He said, I love to get out and run. I want to be running faster than the bigs on my opponent every night. And while Bulls fans are wondering, can he, at some point, even if it's not in his rookie year, replicate the stretch big man role that Lauri was playing, and Bulls fans were disappointed in where Lauri capped off that contribution to the team.
right.
Marko was an okay 3-point shooter overseas, not great. Hopefully he can build upon that and at least be a threat, a viable threat the teams can't ignore, defensively if he's around the perimeter. But the thing I most enjoyed was watching him in transition
Yep.
and not being afraid to run the floor. There was one bucket in particular. He got out in transition ahead of a turnover and then created contact on his way
Yeah.
to the hoop and like calmly just, banked in a little floated leaning shot. I was like, that looks good. I don't
Yeah.
want to talk about what he looked like on the defensive end, but I loved watching him run the floor offensively.
Yeah, and I kind of had the same sentiment as you did, as far as I had only really seen highlights of him playing professionally overseas on YouTube, and what I was impressed by was that he looks bigger. I think that was sort of the biggest knock, because it's like he's kind of skinny. Is he going to get bullied around, with some of these other bigs, these NBA grown men? And he's bulking up a bit. And he looked more athletic. Like he just looked a little more smooth than what I saw in those highlight videos. So I thought that was very good to see. If you're a Bulls fan, again, summer league, so we'll see how things kind of play out. And like you said, defensively, that's a different question. But
at least
last
he was
question,
trying
though,
on the boards,
yep.
though. I like to see that he was putting some
Yes,
work in on the defensive glass.
yeah, which we haven't really been able to see from a guy like Lauri Markkanen.
Right. So when you see a game where Lauri has 8 rebounds, you're like, oh my God, 8 rebounds.
The guy, I can't believe it. He averaged 9 rebounds per game in his sophomore year. I don't know what
19 and
happened
9, man. And
Yeah.
people wonder why I had such high hopes for Lauri. Oh, watch his rookie year and then watch him improve to 19 and 9 his second season.
I don't know what happened, man. So, last question, and it's more looking ahead, for this franchise just beyond the season. But obviously, this new front office, we know, very aggressive in their approach. They're not afraid to take risk, to bring this team back to relevancy, as we've talked about. Now, again, I wouldn't say that the Bulls, at least how they're currently constructed, that it's a title contending team. But based on what this front office has been able to do thus far in their short tenure, how long do you think it'll be for this franchise before they're actually truly a title contender? Because I think we can both agree they're not it right now.
No. Anybody who does think that, bless your hearts. Go listen to C Red Fred's podcast. I mean, I don't think it's unrealistic to expect that if this front office continues to make logical basketball decisions, competent transactions, and continues to make Chicago a desirable location for the best players in this league, you can be talking about competing for a championship in, maybe 4 or 5 years. I mean, maybe 3 if things just
I was
like
going to say
rapidly.
it could potentially be less than that. Yeah, it depends.
It could
a lot of things
potentially
can
be
happen.
less than that. It could potentially be, and like I guess it also depends on your parameters of what is title contender.
Sure.
Is a title contender a team that loses in the second round and falls short of expectations? Or are you talking about you're one of the last 4 teams standing? You're going to the conference finals, and if you don't go to the conference finals, it's a surprise.
Right.
In that scenario, no, I don't think even with these offseason moves, the Bulls are one of those teams yet. But the other thing that I think some Bulls fans are losing sight of is just because that right now, as it stands, we're going to have a Lonzo, LaVine, DeMar, P-Dub, Vooch starting 5, and then, fill in complementary bench pieces this season. That doesn't mean that that's what this Bulls team is going to look like for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Right.
The Bulls, what they have shown us is that this front office is bold and they are capable of doing things other than trading away or trading for Kirk Heinrich, which is the only thing the old front office could do. So if there comes along an opportunity where some other disgruntled star or a star who is ready to leave where they are and wants to come to Chicago, because in the next season or two, they at least prove themselves to be playoff contenders, then they can add that final piece of the puzzle. And it might not be a piece that is here right now, but they are making moves that make them a team that is more likely to be in position to get that final piece.
Yeah.
And that matters.
And I think that's the critical thing, is the culture change, right? Because you talk about before, it shouldn't be hard to attract free agents in a city like Chicago when you know that you're going to be playing for a big market team. But the problem that it was before was because the players didn't trust the front office. You know, it's like they heard of all the shady things that they would do. They didn't really like the dealings. They didn't like the fact that the owner was cheap. Granted, still the same owner, but you know, so far it's looking like this front office has a good level of autonomy. And I think when you add that, players start to recognize that, and they say, hey, I can go to a massive market like Chicago, a historic franchise, the franchise that Michael Jordan built, and I can do something to continue on that legacy. Players weren't thinking like that before. I think it's a little bit different now. So as long as that culture continues and it's perpetuated, that winning mentality by bringing in actual talent, I think that's going to go a long way for the team. I agree with you. I think, you know, we're talking 3 to 5 years before we really can consider them to be title contenders. Yeah. But it's in the right direction. And as a Bulls fan, I'm happy as a result, for sure.
As we were saying earlier, it will probably depend on whether or not the Reinsdorfs are willing to spend even bigger than they've spent with the new front office and all of the people that they've filled out in this organization. My hope is that while Grandpa Jerry is distracted by that shiny object over there, aka the White Sox, Michael Reinsdorf is willingly spending his money. And like that appears to be what's going on right now. And I am so glad that that's what's going on. And in the meantime, you're right, a culture change. Like, yeah, John Paxson is still roaming the Advocate Center on every other Tuesday and collecting them just to like come in and get a paycheck as a special advisor. But Gar's the one that had the reputation among players around the league to say, do not trust this guy. And he's gone. Right. He's the one who had moles in the locker room and spies on the coaching staff that would report back to him. And he's the one who Jimmy Butler's personal trainer said on Twitter, like, I've met drug dealers with a higher moral compass than Gar Forman. That guy is the guy that was a big problem, and he's gone. And what do we see? In the first year after a new front office evaluates what they inherited and then start making moves, 2 big-name players in Lonzo and DeMar DeRozan say, I want to go play in Chicago. Yeah. And that is a huge, huge shift.
Absolutely. Matt, I really appreciate the time, man. Thanks for being on the show, as always. And definitely check out Matt's podcast, Locked On Bulls. I'll leave it linked in the description. Would love to do this again sometime. We can connect throughout the season here and there, and we can chat some more Bulls basketball. But thanks, Matt. I really do appreciate it.
I'm on board anytime. Thanks for having me, Jamal. Appreciate it.